Grief is a landscape of its own, a vast and silent prairie of the soul where the sky is always the color of ash. For Elias Thorne, that landscape had become his entire world. The wind that scoured the plains of Montana was no different from the hollow whisper that had lived inside his chest for 3 years, a constant reminder of the silence where his wife Eleanor's laughter used to be. His ranch, once a testament to hard work and shared dreams, now stood as a monument to decay. Fence posts sagged like weary shoulders, the barn door hung from a single hinge, groaning a rusted eulogy with every gust of wind, and the dust of neglect settled over everything, a fine, grey shroud. Elias moved through this world like a ghost in his own life, his movements mechanical, his eyes fixed on a horizon that promised nothing but more of the same. His only companion was Buster, a cattle dog whose fur was as silvered with age as the weathered wood of the porch, an animal whose loyalty was a quiet, steady beat in the overwhelming silence. Each morning, Elias would rise not from a desire to meet the day, but from the sheer, stubborn refusal to let the world claim his body as it had already claimed his spirit. He would perform the meager chores that kept the ranch from collapsing entirely, his hands, calloused and strong, moving with a memory of purpose they no longer felt. But his gaze would always drift to the one patch of earth he could not bring himself to touch, the barren, rock-strewn square where Eleanor's garden had once bloomed, a riot of color and life that had been the heart of their home. Now, it was just a scar on the land, a place where even the weeds seemed to wither, as if the soil itself was grieving. It was the epicenter of his desolation, a perfect mirror for the barren fields of his own heart. The cruelty of men often finds its most potent expression in the quiet places of the world, far from the judgment of crowds. It arrived at Elias Thorne's ranch on a Tuesday afternoon, churning up a plume of dust that was thick with malice. The engine of the truck was a vulgar roar in the sacred silence, and at the wheel was Silas Kane, a man whose prosperity was built on the misfortunes of others, his heart as hard and unforgiving as the winter ground. Kane and Elias had a history written in barbed wire and stolen water rights, but this visit was not about land. It was about kicking a man who was already down. Kane hauled himself from the truck, a smirk twisting his features. He saw the decay, the ghost of a man standing on the porch, and his eyes glinted with the smug satisfaction of a predator. He spoke of a debt, a fabrication Elias was too weary to contest, and then he revealed his payment. From the back of the truck, he shoved a small, frail figure into the harsh sunlight. It was a girl, no older than 10, with eyes that held the terrified stillness of a trapped bird. Her hair was a tangled black curtain, her clothes were rags, and a deep, purple bruise bloomed on her cheek. She was Chinese, a stranger in this vast, empty land, a piece of human flotsam washed up on the shores of Kane's casual brutality. A gift, Kane sneered, the words dripping with poison. Heard you were lonely out here, Thorne. Found this one wandering. Can't speak a lick of English. She's yours now. A little souvenir to keep the dust company, he laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together, and drove away, leaving the girl standing in the dirt, a tiny, trembling exclamation point in the sprawling sentence of Elias's sorrow. She did not move. She did not cry. She simply stood, her small frame a testament to a world of pain Elias could not begin to imagine, a cruel joke delivered to a man who had forgotten how to laugh. For a long time, Elias did nothing. The girl stood in the yard, and he stood on the porch, the two of them separated by an impassable canyon of shock and despair. The sun beat down, turning the dust to a pale, shimmering gold. In her stillness, Elias saw a reflection of his own paralyses. She was a problem he did not want, a responsibility he could not bear, another wound in a life that was already bleeding out. His first instinct was to turn his back, to walk inside and shut the door on this new, living piece of his misery. But something held him, a sliver of a memory of the man he used to be, the man Eleanor had loved. A man who did not leave a child to bake in the sun. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of his strength, he moved. He did not speak to her, he had no words, and he assumed she had none for him. He simply went inside and filled a bowl with the thin beef stew from the night before, placing it on the edge of the porch along with a glass of water. He retreated back into the shadows of the house, watching through the grimy window. The girl did not approach for what felt like an eternity. She watched the bowl, then the door, her senses on high alert. Finally, driven by a hunger that must have been a gnawing beast inside her, she crept forward, snatched the bowl, and scurried to the far side of the yard, hiding behind a rusted water trough to eat, her back to the house. It was the action of a feral creature, born of a life where every meal was a risk. When she was done, she did not discard the bowl. She took it to the outdoor water pump and, with painstaking care, washed it until it shone, her small hand scrubbing with a focused intensity. She then placed the clean bowl back on the porch edge where he had left it. This simple act of dignity, of order in the midst of chaos, struck Elias with a force that surprised him. It was a quiet rebellion against the filth of her circumstances, a declaration that she was not an animal. That night, he left an old wool blanket on the porch. In the morning, it was gone. Days bled into a week, their existence settling into a silent, fragile routine. He would leave food on the porch, she would retrieve it, eat in solitude, and return the clean bowl. She slept in the barn, having found a corner in the hayloft that she had made her own small sanctuary. Elias never intruded. He gave her space, the one thing he had in abundance. He watched her from a distance, a silent observer of a silent survivor. He saw how she moved with a wariness that was heartbreaking in one so young, her head constantly swiveling, her ears tuned to every sound. Yet, within that fear, there was a core of incredible resilience. She was not idle. She began to impose order on the small corner of the world she inhabited. She swept the barn floor with a makeshift broom of twigs. She mended a tear in her thin shirt with a piece of twine she'd found, her fingers working with a delicate precision. She was claiming her space, her existence, with small, determined actions. One morning, Elias saw her standing by the barren patch of earth that had once been Eleanor's garden. She stood there for a long time, her head tilted as if listening to a secret the dead soil was whispering. Then, with a resolve that seemed to come from a place of deep instinct, she knelt down. She began to pull at the stubborn weeds, her small hands working tirelessly. She started collecting the larger stones that littered the plot, carrying them one by one to a pile at the edge. Elias watched from the kitchen window, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He felt a phantom pain in his chest, a memory of Eleanor doing the very same thing years ago, her face smudged with dirt, her laughter bright against the blue sky. This child, this stranger, was tilling the soil of his deepest grief. He didn't know why she was doing it, but he understood the impulse, to create life where there was none, to cultivate a small patch of beauty in a world of overwhelming ugliness. It was a language he had long forgotten, but his heart was beginning to remember the words. The garden became their unspoken treaty, a neutral ground where the quiet rancher and the silent girl could begin to build a bridge across the chasm of their separate sorrows. Elias continued to watch her toil. He saw the blisters forming on her hands, saw her wince as she pulled a thorny weed, yet she never stopped. Her persistence was a quiet rebuke to his own apathy. She was fighting for this small square of dirt with more passion than he had fought for anything in years. One evening, after she had retreated to the barn, Elias walked out to the garden patch. The soil was still poor, but it was clear of stones and the largest weeds. It was ready. An old, forgotten feeling stirred within him, a flicker of the man who used to help his wife turn the earth each spring. He went to the shed, the air thick with the ghosts of past projects, and found an old hand trowel and a small watering can. He cleaned the rust from the tools, his hands remembering the familiar weight and feel of them. He filled the can at the pump and left both items at the edge of the cleared plot. He offered no explanation, no words. It was a gesture, a silent acknowledgement of her labor, a contribution to her cause. The next morning, he watched as she discovered the tools. She picked up the trowel, her small fingers wrapping around the wooden handle. She looked toward the house, her dark eyes searching the windows for a long moment, a look of profound, questioning surprise on her face. Then, she turned back to the earth and began to dig, the work made easier by the proper tool. A few days later, Elias found a dusty tin box in a drawer, filled with Eleanor's old seed packets. Marigolds, zinnias, and a small packet of vegetable seeds. He left the box beside the watering can. This time, when she found it, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips before vanishing. She treated the seeds like jewels, carefully pushing each one into the soil she had so painstakingly prepared. They were planting a garden together, a silent partnership born of shared work and a mutual need to see something, anything, grow again. Trust, like a garden, is not built in a day. It grows slowly, nurtured by small, consistent acts of kindness. The first rain came a week after the seeds were planted. Elias watched from the porch as the girl stood in the middle of the garden, her face turned up to the sky, letting the cool water wash over her. She didn't run for shelter. She stood there as if receiving a blessing, a small, solitary figure being cleansed. It was after the rain that the first sign of a breakthrough occurred. A sharp piece of shale, hidden in the mud, sliced open her palm as she worked. She gasped, a tiny, sharp sound, and cradled her bleeding hand. Elias saw it happen. Without thinking, he was off the porch and moving toward her. She flinched violently as he approached, scrambling backward, her eyes wide with the familiar terror he'd seen the day she arrived. He stopped, holding his hands up, palms open, a universal sign of peace. "Easy," he said, his voice a low, rough sound from disuse. He moved slowly, deliberately, kneeling in the mud a few feet from her. He gestured to her hand. She hesitated, her chest rising and falling rapidly. He simply waited, his expression calm, patient. After a long moment, she tentatively extended her wounded hand. He took it gently, his large, calloused fingers dwarfing hers. Her hand was trembling, but she didn't pull away. He led her to the porch, to the pump, and carefully washed the dirt and blood from the cut. He brought out the first aid kit, cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made her hiss but not retreat, and wrapped it in a clean white bandage. Throughout the entire process, he did not speak, but his touch was tender, respectful. It was the first time they had made physical contact. It was an apology for the cruelty of the world, a promise of safety. When he was done, she looked down at her bandaged hand, then up at his face. For the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else, something fragile and new. It was the first sprout of trust. The first true sign of life appeared on a sun-drenched morning. A single, tiny green shoot, no bigger than an eyelash, had pushed its way through the dark soil. It was impossibly small, impossibly fragile, yet it was a vibrant, defiant declaration of life. Elias saw it first. He knelt by the garden, his rough finger gently tracing the air around the sprout, careful not to touch it. A feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years swelled in his chest. It was not the delirious joy he had shared with Eleanor, but a quieter, more profound emotion, a deep, soul-settling sense of hope. When the girl came out, she saw him kneeling and her steps faltered, but then she saw what he was looking at. She rushed to the spot and dropped to her knees beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. A genuine, unreserved smile broke across her face, transforming her features, chasing away the shadows of fear and hardship. It was the first time he had seen her truly smile, and the sight was like the sun breaking through the perpetual grey clouds of his heart. She looked from the sprout to him, her smile unwavering, and in that shared moment of triumph, the space between them vanished. They were no longer just a man and a girl, they were partners. From that day on, a subtle shift occurred. He no longer just left tools for her, he began to work alongside her. They would spend hours in the garden together, moving in a comfortable, synchronized silence. He would break up the tougher soil, she would water the delicate seedlings. He built a small fence around the plot to keep out rabbits, she meticulously pulled every new weed. Buster, the old dog, would often lie in the shade nearby, a quiet, furry guardian watching over their shared project. The garden was flourishing, and with it, something inside Elias was coming back to life. The dust in the house seemed less oppressive, the silence less profound. It was being filled, note by quiet note, with the gentle sounds of purposeful work, of two broken souls tending to a small patch of earth and, in doing so, tending to each other. The world, however, has a way of trying to reclaim those who have escaped its cruelty. The sound of Silas Kane's truck was an obscenity once more, a violent tearing of the fragile peace that had settled over the ranch. He arrived as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the yard. He saw the repaired fence posts, the clean-swept porch, and his eyes narrowed. Then he saw the garden. It was no longer a barren patch but a thriving rectangle of green life, dotted with the bright orange and yellow of blooming marigolds. His gaze shifted and found Elias and the girl, standing near the fruits of their labor. The girl was no longer the hollow-eyed creature he had discarded. There was color in her cheeks, and she stood not behind Elias, but beside him. Cain's smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of raw, possessive anger. The joke had backfired. His intended symbol of Thorn's decay had become a symbol of his resurrection. "Well, well," Cain spat, climbing out of his truck. "Looks like my little charity project has been busy." He strode toward them, his boots crushing the grass. "The fun's over, Thorn. I'm here to collect my property." He lunged for the girl, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. Elias moved faster than he had in years. He stepped between them, his body a solid wall. "She's not your property," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous, a rumbling growl that came from the deepest part of his being. "Get off my land." A dark cloud rolled across the sun, plunging the scene into a sudden, ominous twilight. The wind picked up, whipping dust into the air, a prelude to a storm that had been brewing on the horizon, a perfect mirror for the violence about to be unleashed. The first crack of thunder split the sky, a celestial starting gun for the battle to come. Cain laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your land? You're nothing, Thorn." A washed-up old man living in a mausoleum, he shoved Elias, a hard, contemptuous push. But the man he shoved was not the hollow shell he had taunted weeks ago. This was a man with something to protect. Elias didn't stagger. He stood his ground, his feet planted as firmly as the old oaks by the creek. The grief that had weighed him down for years had forged a strength he didn't know he possessed. When Cain swung a clumsy, powerful fist, Elias moved with an instinct born of desperation. He deflected the blow and drove his own fist into Cain's gut. The fight was not a display of skill, it was a primal, brutal clash of wills. It was the raw violence of a cornered animal defending its young. They crashed to the ground, rolling in the dirt near the edge of the fragile garden. Cain was bigger, heavier, but Elias was fueled by a righteous fury that burned hotter than any simple malice. He fought for the silent girl cowering by the porch. He fought for the memory of the woman who had planted the first seeds in this very soil. He fought for the tiny green sprout that had dared to grow in the wasteland of his heart. The storm broke in its full fury. Rain lashed down, turning the dust to mud, plastering their hair to their heads. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the scene in stark, flashing tableaus of desperate struggle. Elias felt a searing pain as Cain's ring caught him above the eye, but he barely registered it. He saw only the hate in Cain's eyes and knew he could not let it win. He could not let this poison touch the new life he and the girl had so carefully cultivated. With a final, guttural roar that was torn from the very depths of his soul, Elias heaved Cain off him, scrambled to his feet, and with all the strength he had, threw the man back towards his truck. "Never," Elias panted, blood and rain dripping from his face. "Come back here again." Cain, bruised and defeated, stared at the transformed rancher with a look of disbelief and fear. He scrambled into his truck and sped away, his tires slinging mud, a final, impotent act of desecration before he was swallowed by the storm. The fury of the storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air was cool and smelled of rain-soaked earth. Elias stood panting, his body aching, leaning against a fence post. The cut above his eye throbbed, and blood trickled down his temple, but he felt a profound, exhilarating sense of victory. He had not just defended the girl, he had defended his own soul. He heard soft footsteps in the mud behind him. He turned to see the girl approaching, not with fear, but with a quiet, solemn purpose. In her hands, she held a clean rag and a small bowl of water. She stopped in front of him, her eyes fixed on the cut on his face. She reached up, and with a touch as gentle as a moth's wing, she began to clean the wound. It was a perfect, poignant echo of the day he had cleaned her hand, the cycle of care and trust now complete. In that moment, looking down at her, her small face etched with concern for him, a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled his knees crashed over him. This was not pity or responsibility. It was love. A fierce, protective, paternal love that filled all the hollow spaces inside him. He realized with a stunning clarity that he didn't even know her name. "What?" he began, his voice cracking, thick with unshed tears and years of disuse. "What is your name?" She finished dabbing his cut and looked up at him, her dark, expressive eyes meeting his. She looked past him, to the garden, where a single, resilient white flower had opened its petals after the rain. She pointed to the flower, a beautiful, delicate blossom thriving in the mud. Then, she pointed to her own chest. For the first time, her voice, soft and clear as a small bell, filled the air between them. "Liane," she said. The word was a gift, a key, a revelation. Elias felt the tears he had held back for 3 long years finally break free, streaming down his face, mingling with the rain and the blood, washing away the last of the ash and dust from his soul. He knelt in the mud in front of her. "Liane," he repeated, the name a prayer on his lips. "My name is Elias." The seasons turned, and the harsh Montana landscape softened into the golden hues of autumn, then yielded to the quiet blanket of winter, and finally burst forth again in the vibrant green of spring. The Thorn Ranch was no longer a monument to decay. It was a testament to resurrection. The fences were mended, the barn door was rehung, and a fresh coat of paint on the house stood bright against the endless sky. At the heart of it all was the garden, now a sprawling, bountiful plot of vegetables and flowers, a riot of life and color that Eleanor would have loved. It was the center of their new world, a world filled not with overwhelming silence, but with a comfortable, easy quiet. Elias and Liane Thorne, a father and daughter forged not by blood but by a shared will to grow, had become a family. He taught her about the rhythm of the land, the names of the constellations, the difference between a hawk and an eagle. She, in turn, taught him how to see the world again, to find joy in the small miracles, the taste of a sun-warmed tomato, the intricate pattern of a spider's web, the sound of Buster's tail thumping a happy rhythm on the porch. Her English grew every day, but their most profound communication remained in the shared language of gestures, of knowing glances, of working side by side to nurture the life they had built together. The gaping wound of grief in Elias's heart had not vanished, but it had healed into a scar, a part of him that he carried with strength and gratitude, a reminder of a love that had made this new love possible. Sometimes, the cruelest acts can become the unintended seeds of the greatest grace. A gesture of pure malice, meant to mock a man's grief and break his spirit, instead became the very catalyst for his salvation. It shows us that hope is not a passive thing to be waited for, but an active choice, a seed to be planted and tended, even in the most barren and hostile soil. What we see in the story of Elias and Liane is a profound truth about the human spirit, its incredible capacity for resilience and its deep, instinctual need to nurture. When faced with devastation, we have a choice. We can allow the barren landscapes of our sorrow to consume us, or we can find one small patch of earth, one small act of kindness, and begin to cultivate it. The world will always contain cruelty. There will always be those who seek to tear down, to mock, and to destroy. But their power is finite. It shatters against the quiet, stubborn strength of someone planting a seed, cleaning a wound, or offering a bowl of stew. True strength isn't found in the fist you raise to strike another, but in the hand you extend to help something grow. It is a reminder that the most powerful changes in our lives and in the world often begin not with a roar, but with a whisper. They begin in the silence, with a shared look, a simple tool, and the brave, defiant act of planting a single flower in the mud. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it so that its message of hope and resilience can find the soil where it needs to grow.